Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me, as always, is the effable, if that's still a word, I don't know,
I
Ansgar
am
Odinson.
very affable.
Yes, you are, sir. Yes, you are. Oh my God. Sammy Jenkins was in there going like, "You guys are machines," and I'm like, "Yeah, we're functioning perfectly." Um,
We are like machines. We just happen to be like machines which are breaking down.
Yeah, we're
So
machines that haven't been oiled though, really. Oh boy. So welcome to another episode of In Time. It is nice to be doing one that isn't a crisis emergency all hands on deck episode. Um,
though it is
and
breaking news.
okay, that's it. You're okay. Could someone mute his mic? Did you just no, well, and that was you. So we did one where Ansgar was unavailable. Unfortunately, he was like, "I'm going to go get some sleep." I was like, "Okay." He was down less than 5 minutes. That was from the 5 minutes from when he sat down. And Kitty, calls me up and says, "Nick, there's an airplane that's been downed, a civilian aircraft right outside of Tehran." And I was really impressed. I was like, "Wow, that's a really good." Forgery. That's a really good fake. I mean, I would almost bite on that. I was like, you almost had me, but that didn't happen. She goes, no, Nick, that really happened. I was like, you waited until Ansgar said he was going, and then you hit me with that. It's like, no, you're making that up. It's Nick, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but it's just like, you'd better be joking. I think well, hopefully we're going to take a little bit of a break from the breaking news. If more happens, it's going to get covered. I can't guarantee that the hosts covering it are going to be speaking in anything other than tongues, but we will do our best to cover it. Ansgar and I have been kind of hot bunking the show. One of us is asleep and the other one's. But
Oh, it's so true.
oh Jesus, yeah. As of there have been some changes on. Now we were reporting live when a number of these things happened. What we do know is during that initial missile attack, it appears now there were two attacks. It appears it was two military bases. There was, I think, as I understand it, 24 missiles and about 10 hit. We had reported originally that there were a number of casualties. We're going to discuss the casualty situation and a few other things. But I think the president has come out. He has spoken about this. There were some questions about why he didn't speak about it last night. We covered most of that in our show with Dr. Misha Griffith, and I think there's a lot of speculation going on. And as we get more details, we'll bring them to you. If it's really a sort of emergency breaking news thing, I'm hoping we don't have any more of those for a while. But what we do have here is, I think the downing of that civilian aircraft is a very big deal, and I think we need to try to understand that better. I think that's got some significant implications. Nobody really knows what happened, and so we have on a very special guest, Jared.
Good evening, everyone.
Jared, hello there. How are you?
I'm about as exhausted as you guys, but you know what? Caffeine is a wonderful thing if you know how to utilize it.
Hmm.
Oh, Ansgar's got a saying. What was that about? About
Sleep
the
is but a poor substitute for caffeine.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Jared, thank you very much for joining us. And if I may, who on earth are
All
you?
right. For those who are uninitiated, I am Jared. I am the purveyor of the channel AT2 Productions, where I host a weekly veterans panel show where we talk about just about any and everything under the sun, and from time to time actually poke fun at people of the likes of, well, young earth creationists and flat earthers predominantly. And when this topic came up, I was actually, when the attacks happened and were reported, I was actually on a live stream, actually helping promote another channel at the time, and people were asking, oh, are we going to go live? Are we going to go live after this and talk specifically about it? And to which I said, no, that's not what we're here on this stream for. We are acknowledging it. We will talk about it later as more details are available. And after going off air is when even more occurrences happened that definitely piqued my interest and curiosity. So, for those who don't know, I am a veteran of the U.S. Navy, specifically aviation support, where I was qualified as an aviation warfare specialist and a surface warfare specialist. And a lot of what's going on right now really is taking me back into a particular mindset, the mindset that you actually have to have as a warfighter in this very nondescript nature of operations. And to say that there's reason to question would be an understatement at this point from my personal point of view.
All right. So now, at the time that this happened, we had a lot of conflicting reports of things going on. One of the things that we had heard was that fighters were scrambled out of the UAE, and the I haven't heard any confirmation of that. At the time, it seemed confirmed. I think we had two different news sources, reliable news sources, saying that, but I haven't heard it since then. Now, I would assume that if there was some kind of strike on a military base, they might scramble combat air patrol, and that was my thinking. And if so, that would go over the air base in Iraq. We then also heard that there were two Iranian airplanes that had entered Iraqi airspace, and I assume if they go anywhere near the any of those that cap, there's going to be an engagement. Now, we didn't hear anything about that after that. 45 minutes later, we heard that a civilian Ukrainian airplane carrying 180 passengers crashed about 7 miles outside of Tehran. So the question, we had on Dr. Griffith, she had said, well, you're going to find a lot of anti-aircraft. Why might you find a lot of anti-aircraft defensive positions around a airport in Iran?
So in that area, what you will often find is that unlike the US and our NATO allies, the majority of your air forces in the Middle East actually are stationed at what are otherwise commercially operating airports. So those locations are going to be a high priority target. They are going to be a military target because when go back to the invasion of Iraq and also the Persian Gulf War, the initial phases that we utilize start with air power. You want to gain air superiority over the area, and then your first tier attacks are to take out your opponent's command and control and operational infrastructure. That is going to be your identified military command bunkers, their radar station assets so they can't see, and also if they have an air force of any type, you are going to hit the places that that their air forces are actually parked. You pretty much want to get them when they don't expect it and keep them on the ground. If you keep their air forces on the ground, that makes it easier for your strike packages to do their job.
So they're going to have. So even though it's a civilian air force, a civilian air base, an airport, we tend to call in English a civilian air base an airport. Okay, I'm doing fine, thank you. The airport. So even though it's an airport, it could launch obviously military aircraft. So they're going to take that out as well.
Correct. As a matter of fact, for those here in the U.S., we actually have a couple notable setups that are in that same vein. For those out on the West Coast, if you ever go to Hawaii and you fly directly into Honolulu, well, technically you'll be flying into Pearl Harbor. You will be landing at the on the shared runway between the Honolulu International Airport and Hickam Air Force Base. They utilize the same runway for both installations. Here on the East Coast, up in New England, there is a former it's still an Air Force base, but the actual tarmac has been turned over to the local civilian authorities. It is actually the airport that the Boston Bruins NHL hockey team tend to fly out of whenever they go on road trips. Hanscom Air Force Base is still an active Air Force base for the U.S. Air Force, but they share part of the property and they share the flight line with the local airport authority. So you will have similar situations like that.
All right. So now, like I said, we had some conflicting reports on whether there was enemy aircraft and enemies. In this case, depends on who you are, but there's certainly two different sides possibly engaging. We've had no reports that there was any engagement. At one point, we had thought, well, maybe an airplane accidentally engaged that. Maybe it was anti-aircraft fire. Although, actually, before we get into that, really quickly, because we discussed this a bit earlier, and I wanted your take on it, there was originally, and some of the reports have changed, some have stayed reasonably consistent. We had reported between 24 and 30 casualties at the base from two sets of missile strikes. I'm sorry, two bases. And now they're saying none. Any thoughts on how that may have changed?
Yes. So, first of all, let's make sure everyone understands what is actually being talked about. From military parlance, the term casualty actually refers to anyone who is no longer fit to perform their job, be it due to injury or death, or they can't find them, or they find signs that there may have been an injury and they haven't located. They're in that questionable area.
So even if they're missing, they could
will,
actually be working, but they're a casualty until they're found.
Correct. Okay. So this is where in the immediate aftermath, you always want to try to get a muster, especially if something like this happens when you're in a more relaxed position initially, to where you'll have people trying to get their sleep in their barracks or their lodging at where they're at, and then you have your 24-hour support going on. You always want to make sure you have accountability of your people. If you don't have accountability of that person, and it is during an attack or immediately following, the assumption is they're a casualty. So as everything goes through and time goes along, there is that changing of the numbers that will happen. And also, what I noticed with the numbers that were reported, with the stations that were hit, with the air bases that were targeted in Iraq, they were coalition locations. So it wasn't just U.S. forces there. There were some U.S., there were some Iraqi, there were also Denmark and Norway, if I remember correctly.
Mm.
And so the final number that
Palau,
is
do not forget Palau.
Yeah. Again, you have multinational bits. You have people who are going to be reporting to their individual chain of command. So not everyone is going to ultimately report and get everything out through the same avenues, especially immediately after the attack and when the press actually has the information, is putting it out there. So it going from a report of 30 to 40 casualties, that is 30 to 40 people either injured with something as I hate to say it, as less severe as a broken arm, all the way to someone who may have been actually removed completely, someone who was killed in action. What we got from President Trump earlier today was there were no casualties. He was speaking specifically about the U.S. forces. Flat out.
Yes, Iraq has also officially reported no casualties.
Yeah. And that's one of the ones, the initial reports were that there were casualties, but they were Iraqi. They were not part of the other coalition nations. So again, this is where in that initial chaos of the attack, you can have misreported and over-reported numbers in that way.
All right. So now I'd like to get a little bit to the plane. There's been some confusion. I think for now we'll stay out of, well, we may get to the geopolitical ramifications. Obviously, everyone was sitting there going, well, it's a Ukrainian plane. Is this going to get the Russians involved? Were they? And I don't know if we're going to end up there. I suspect maybe not, but I think it's worth covering. So now it seems to me that you had thought initially that when this plane went down that it probably wasn't a mechanical failure.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were reasons to question.
Okay.
There
So
are reasons to question.
uh,
I will say that.
let's talk about a couple of the ones. Let's just give a sort of overview of a couple of the basic ones, and then I know. So give an overview of just some of the basic ones, then we'll dive into some of the bigger ones.
Well, so the first thing that actually piqued my attention was we were still getting reports of what actually had happened, and then we got this report of a civilian airliner outside of Tehran going down. And the timing of it alone makes it a curious event because was it tied to the actions that took place? Was it an an accident that took place? Because something that we need to remember, even the US, with the advanced technologies that we have from a military standpoint, we have been a part of accidents and misidentification.
Yes.
If I remember right,
Misidentification, by that you mean a friend or foe will see a aircraft, we don't realize it's civilian, and that's what
well,
you mean by?
so part of the radar systems that are used to track aircraft and other airborne objects, your aircraft to have a system that's called IFF, identify friend or foe. And the way that system works is it actually is coded with a specific set of information that will tell the receiving radar station what nation the aircraft is from, what type of aircraft it is, and then it'll also give some basic telemetry as well. At least ours did. With that, when you actually look at think about in the movies, when you see a radar screen from a military standpoint, you see the sweep going around the CRT, and you see the dot come up, and then the letter codes next to it.
Yep.
The actual radar return is the blip. That is the actual return of the radar pulse to identify where that craft is.
Mm-hmm.
Those letters next to it is that returned data pulse from the IFF system.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different modes that identify whether or not it's a military aircraft, whether it's a civilian aircraft. There's a lot of nuance and settings to it. What at least used to happen, and this is what actually led to the, if I remember right, it was the USS Vincennes who misidentified an aircraft. It looked to be going into an attack posture, and in a defensive mindset, they ended up firing off one of their surface-to-air missiles and took down the aircraft. The reason for this is the radar operator was recognizing it as an Iranian F-14, which is a military fighter interceptor with bombing capabilities. Unfortunately, it was a civilian airliner. And it was operator error that caused the misidentification. So that's where you do have to be diligent in the performance of your duties when in that type of situation. So with the timing of the aircraft going down, one of the first questions that everyone would have is this connected to the rocket attacks that just happened in Iraq? Reasonable question to ask. It's the further information that make the story more juicy from my standpoint.
All right, we have a quest. Actually, I will get to that in a minute because I do want to get back to the air bases, but I want to stay on this while we're here for a few more minutes. So now, have you seen the video? You have to have seen the video. We showed that, and I know you're a big fan of the show, and you watch every single episode religiously. So I know you saw the video. What did that look like to you?
It did not, on initial inspection, it does not look like a mechanical failure.
Why not?
The location and manner of the failure is not one that I would expect, especially with how quickly the aircraft came down afterwards. So one of the things that really perked my bit and why I wanted to make sure everyone understood the IFF system is when you have an engine or systems failure in an aircraft, unless you unless you lose the entire electrical system in one shot, the radar station, the local radar station that is actually tracking the craft as it's taking off and going through its departure, is not going to lose the return and the IFF data immediately unless it is a system failure of that segment.
And according to what I was going to say, and it was according to what I read, they suddenly lost contact at 8,000 feet. They did not have any sort of contact after that. They didn't have contact with the plane as it was coming down, as you would normally expect with an engine failure. Is that correct?
Correct. And most of your engine failures, there will be a progressive loss. You will still have the radar return, and with many of the engine failures of that platform type, a single engine failure, they will still be able to reasonably control the aircraft to control descent as much as possible. For there to be a catastrophic failure and the method of the aircraft coming down, and from what we saw the results, it could be catastrophic failure. It could have been a planned event that was unrelated to the attack, because let's face it, international air travel is a huge target for terrorist organizations. It is actually why Israel has some of the best practices and some of the most diligent security officers. So there's also reports that I ended up reading about where you have eyewitnesses that have said that they actually saw something heading towards the aircraft right before the event happened. And that's where a question comes in. If it was at 8,000 feet, it is in a gray area for the majority of your surface-to-air missile systems that are of Russian design. However, there are portable shoulder-fired options that would have the same effect. What we could actually point to, again, historically was, if I remember right, it was TWA Flight 800 off of Long Island. There were similar reports there where people thought it was a external event that ended up taking that aircraft down. And even back then, there are shoulder-fired anti-aircraft platforms that are available, that in a defensive posture around an airport that is also a military installation, you would have the full myriad of weapons platforms for the defense of the airspace to be available, especially with the amount of posturing that has been going on for months and years. And that's another thing. We cannot forget the prolonged history of what has been going on in the region, even before looking at the political landscape locally, local to us here in the U.S.
So the one thing that could easily clear this up, obviously, is the black box. Now, because of the way international law is, when the plane because the plane went down inside of Iran, it is their privilege to lead the investigation, which means they do not have to give up that black box legally. However, every single country ever has always given the black box and shared its data with the manufacturer of whatever plane it is that has gone down. That is just standard operating procedure because it helps aid the investigation. In this case, they are refusing to hand over the black box. They have said that they will not do that. So obviously people are becoming rather suspicious, but is there any reason that you can think of, let's try not to get conspiratorial, is there any reason you can think of they would not be handing over that black box?
And keep in mind that while Ansgar said try not to, it's getting increasingly difficult.
It's tough. It really is, because before getting into that, let's make sure everyone understands when we talk about the black box, what is actually being talked about. It's the flight data recorder system, which is actually two sets of recording apparatuses. You have the telemetry and data collection system, which captures aircraft systems data. And then you have the cockpit voice recorder. The combination of those two will tell you almost 100% of what was going on with the aircraft from the time it powered up until the event happened and the data recorder stopped because the aircraft was done and lost power. So it would be wise of a nation that is being possibly suspected of questionable acts to be free and open with that information. It goes into the saying that an honest man has no reason to hide information. Now, at the same time, if they think that there was something going on, whether or not it was government involved ultimately, I would see why they would want to delay the release. That way they have time to collect the data, make their records of it so they can analyze it through their means, but also have it available to at least the country of origin of the aircraft that went down.
Yeah.
At least those two, in my view, should have access to the flight recorder data. And an unwillingness to do even that, it does have to make you question the motives of why would they do it. And I cannot think of a rational, non-conspiratorial reason to not just delay it, to outright say, we are not going to release it. We are not going to share the information. That's where it puts up a red flag. It gives you reason to question. At this point, that's what we have. We have a lot of questions and very, very, very few answers.
I'm going to quickly switch to gears. We'll come back to this one, but I'm going to quickly switch gears. Quessa for 10,001. Some analysis are suggesting that Iran intentionally used ballistic missiles to give warning, quote, give warning to the U.S. beforehand, rather than use a more discreet, immediate means of attack like militia assets in Iraq. A ballistic missile, usually, if I understand ballistic missiles correctly, they have a really huge trajectory, which gives them a phenomenal distance. But they come down, first of all, usually by gravity, so they're not really powered coming down, and they're not as accurate, and they can be spotted pretty far away by our systems.
Well, ballistic missiles actually are more accurate than a lot of people think, depending on the system and the missile being used.
Right.
And very simply, you were very close to a ballistic missile, how it actually works. You have your launch phase, your boost phase, and then your terminal phase. Obviously, launch is when it initially leaves the platform that it was fired from. Your boost is the next stage, which actually gets it into the trajectory towards the target that it's intended to go for. And then once that is expelled, the remaining bit is your terminal phase. It is unpowered, but depending on the system, you may actually have some flight controls to actually still be able to steer it. But yes, it is in free fall at that point.
Okay.
Depending on the system and the distance that it is being targeted at, will determine actually how high up in elevation the terminal phase will actually take place. Your longer distance, longer range, really reach out and touch someone like our Trident D5s, which are on the ballistic missile submarines. Those actually have a very high ceiling that they reach, because we'll admit some of us were playing around with it last night, and we checked it from both coasts. If the U.S. was interested in retaliating in kind with a ballistic missile, we could do it with a submarine anywhere from 5 to 50 miles, nautical miles off our own coast, and hit
off our own coast
and hit anywhere in Iran.
Out of curiosity, what would be the flight time on that?
Jay Brown, Jay Brown, who I saw out in the chat, would know more, but if my rough numbers were correct, anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes.
Okay, so
Give or
it's I
take.
mean it take yeah. So but it okay.
Yeah, it's not a quick thing from that distance. Of course, the farther away from the target you are, the longer the travel time, the more warning they're going to have on the receiving end. With going from Iran directly into Iraq, just literally just going next door, your warning time is still going to be in the minutes, but it's not going to be nearly as long, especially with the distance that they were going.
So why might they want to give us extra warning? And what if they said they're going to retaliate and they're going to, rain fire on us? Why might they not have done as much damage as they could have?
Timing and location at the base. What a lot of people don't realize is that a military installation and a joint base, oftentimes the buildings where people are working and staying are actually going to be spread out. The more empty space you actually have in a installation like that actually does work a little bit as a defense, because it decreases the likelihood of a weapon system actually hitting a populated area.
Yeah.
And so it really does become a numbers game. And also the overall staffing size of the operation post will play a factor into that as well. If say the area and the installation was intended to operate 10,000 people, but they can get away with an operational skeleton crew of below 5,000, they're going to have a lot more space to actually be around doing everything. Also, with a lot of your rockets and ballistic missile technologies, your area of where you're actually targeting is not nearly as precise as if you were to use, say, a TLAM, a Tomahawk cruise missile, or a laser-guided munition. Your precision munitions nowadays that we have actually have a very small area of accuracy where it'll actually hit what it's intended to actually go for. A lot of your ballistic stuff, a lot of your longer range stuff, that area gets wider. So that's where, out of the 24 that were launched, not every one hit its intended target, because you still do have that guidance error.
All right. This may be a little out of your immediate area of expertise, but I want to ask you this. If you think you can opine, the military is not a single entity. It's made up of a lot of people thinking very different things. But if you're in the military right now in the US, what are some things that maybe are going through your head? And if you want to speak just for you, particularly what you might be feeling if you were there, I mean, a lot's changing. Are you just trying to focus on the job, or are you trying to think about? Are you worried about what's going on? What are you putting trust in the system?
Your first bit is training kicks in. One of the things that the U.S. military actually really does quite well is focusing on training. I was naval aviation. I was aboard an aircraft carrier, and without fail, when we were in deep water, anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, we were doing a drill. We were actually doing what's called a general quarters drill, where we would simulate the ship being attacked, and it would give time. It would provide an opportunity for people to recognize, hey, if I'm in the middle of doing this and I'm not in my assigned space for the general quarters, I need to be able to react immediately to the klaxon, go to where I'm supposed to, get dressed out, and get ready to do that specific duty. So in an event like what happened in Iraq with the attack from the US forces, that's immediate instinct is when you hear that notification of an attack going on, you just naturally kick into, what is my training? Where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? And you just almost go into automatic. It is a bit of a survival mode because you are focusing not so much on what else is going on around you per se. Your initial concern is get to where I'm supposed to be. However, during an active attack, things can go haywire. People can end up with actual shell shock and be frozen in that it's almost like a vapor lock of the brain, whereas they know what to do, but the stress of the situation catches them off guard and they hesitate. And that's why we train in the way that we do, to prevent that hesitation if at all possible. And
So, so outside of that, so outside of the immediate, we've now had about 24, 48 hours since things have started to heat up. Again, I'm sure there's a wide range. I'm sure there's some people who are saying, "Yay, let's we need to," and not to be I mean, I know that's a minority, but I'm sure there are someone like we've been sitting on our asses. We need to go over there and get them. Some are sitting there saying, like, I mean, what? Let's again say you personally were there. What would you be trying to think about or do right now in some downtime while let's assume even you were maybe stationed on a ship off in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean. What would you be worried about, thinking about?
so direct personal experience, if I was there. So we do have a couple carriers operating in the area. And one of the ways that some of us found out about the attack was actually slightly before the news outlets did, because a friend of mine who's actually on my panel, who's out in the live chat, was, um, if I remember correctly, it was either he or his spouse was talking to the spouse of a friend who is on one of the ships in the area. And the friend that was on the ship was talking via I believe it was Facebook Messenger at the time. Communications went dark. The person like was showing that they were typing, and then all of a sudden they went offline. What happens when we are attacked from a U.S. military standpoint on the carrier?
Mhm.
The first thing we do is we shut off outside non-essential communications. We actually go into a protected posture to get ourselves in the situation where if anything happens, we can react to it. They went to general quarters because with an attack from Iran to the land base, the immediate thought of, we're here in the Persian Gulf. Iran has been playing games with our ships in the water as we've been transiting. Are they going to come after us next?
Mm.
That question is there immediately. Now, generally speaking, on the carriers, you have an idea of when general quarters drills are going to take place. So when one happens that you weren't expecting,
Yeah.
you immediately know, okay, something just happened. And the natural instinct is going to want to make up in your mind what is actually going on, which can be immensely distracting and detrimental, especially depending on what your job actually is. With that being said, that's where sometimes the active thought of, nope, this is real, that I need to do my job, I need to focus on the training. And that's why it's often seen as a trope in movies with a military connection. The first one that's actually coming to mind is Starship Troopers, where they're about to land prior to the first battle early in the movie.
Yep.
And you have the sergeant saying, remember your training. That's why they train in the way they did, because you're going into that environment. There's going to be stuff going on that is going to stress you out and distract you in every which way. But you need to remember your training and focus on what you're actually there to do. Being on a forward operation base, being directly under attack would be more stressful than I can imagine right now, because being on a carrier, you really do get lulled into a little bit of a false sense of security.
Hmm.
because even though we train and recognize that, yes, the carrier can be hit, yes, the carrier can be damaged, our carriers are not 100% impervious. No
Yeah.
military asset is. And we've
Um,
gone so long since something has happened, we our generation gets complacent. Um, so those first few minutes of an attack are going to be hectic. It's why your initial reporting numbers are going to be off,
Hmm.
because you'll have people who, by muscle memory, may be going in a similar path or direction from what they've trained, but because they were somewhere else when they started, it takes them longer to get to where they're actually supposed to be.
I need to quickly address something in chat.
Mhm.
Uh, Daryl Frost in chat seems to think that they're not handing over the black box because they don't trust the United States. Blah 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 blah. It is not standard operating procedure for the country who's investigating to hand over the black box to the United States. It's standard operating procedure to hand it over to the manufacturer of the plane. Now, the manufacturer of the plane in this instance is actually in Ukraine. This was a Ukrainian jet, owned by a Ukrainian company, and it was bound for Ukraine from Iran. The reason that this is standard operating procedure is because, well, the manufacturers know more about the plane than anyone else. And so they usually, in fact, in every case that I could ever find, assist with the investigation. What's very startling about this is Ukraine has been invited to help with the investigation. They're just not allowed access to the black box, which is very, very strange. Um, the other, let's see, the other thing is yeah, which brings me to actually what I was going to say next is they've invited Ukraine to come and participate in the investigation, but one of the most key elements of that investigation, the black box, they have been denied access to. Everyone's been denied access to. It's it's very strange at the very least. I
If they,
can't. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, if they're given, I want to know from Jared, if they're given access to the site without the black box, how likely is it that, I mean, I would assume they'd send their best investigators, probably people with military experience. How likely is it, and or depending on the type of anti-aircraft used, assuming that's what happened here, how likely is it that just looking at the wreckage, you could make a determination of some kind as to the likelihood that it was taken down by anti-aircraft?
It, you can get reasonably close. It all part of the crash analysis is, at least for the NTSB, for the US and what Europe does is what I'm familiar with. They actually, if possible, they will relocate all of the identified wreckage to a controlled access site and literally try to rebuild the aircraft from the scraps to try to get a sense of where did the external failure occur, how did it occur, what sort of telltale markings, and they will do a forensics analysis in that mold to try to figure it out, where they can get reasonably close to a basic type of event that took place. The problem they're going to run into is a catastrophic engine failure with resulting fuel ignition will look similar enough to a missile strike,
Mhm.
depending on location, to give a false indicator to where it will not be an exclusionary type of analysis just from the physical bit alone. That's where, sorry, that's where the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder data comes in, because when the aircraft is on, when they're going through pre-flight, when they're going through their flight and everything, everything's said in the cockpit is being recorded by the headsets that each flight crew member is wearing. Your pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer, they're talking, they're going through their checklists and everything, and anything out of the ordinary is called out and reported by operating procedures of operating that aircraft. That is why the black box is crucial to understanding what actually happened in any kind of event with a commercial aircraft.
If let's assume for a second that the black box was released, everybody could hear it, and there were no auditory indications of any other engine issues. There was no warnings on anything, and would there be a way that the black box could differentiate between a catastrophic failure, a short near the engine, near the tank that lit the fuel? Tanks go up instantaneously, which isn't usually how it works. But let's assume worst case scenario, there is some kind of catastrophic failure that somehow manages to light the fuel in one of the wings. Let me rephrase, perhaps be a little more specific. Is there a mechanical failure that would be within a remote possibility that would be indistinguishable from a missile strike? How well could those boxes really answer? What are you? This is the way to ask it. What are you looking for in these boxes if you want to know if it was a missile strike? What are you looking for?
So for a comparison, in the flight data recorder, the actual telemetry data, what your 737 and newer aircraft actually do have a lot of internal checkpoints and data points that are constantly under monitor when the aircraft is on and operating. When it is possible that you can have an alarm go off for one of the engines and it only be active for a fraction of a second before the catastrophic event happens. But that's what you would be looking for. You would be looking for, are there any alarm indications that happened at any point prior to the event the loss of the craft taking place? It doesn't, as long as there is enough time between the catastrophic event occurring and that slight lead time to when an alarm triggers, that's what's going to clue them into it not being external. If there is a possibility of sensor failure or lack of reporting data to where they don't have any of those telltale markers there, and it still be an internal failure. There is that possibility. So the combination of the two, of the physical forensics and analyzing the data recorder, though the combination of the two is what is going to increase the certainty of the analysis of what actually took place. Is it going to be 100%? At this point, I would err on it not being a solidified answer. However, it will get to very reasonably what took place.
No. And usually that combined with the aircraft reconstruction, that is usually a pretty solid way. They usually have a pretty solid answer when you combine all that data. How likely are they going to be able to, now, since Ukraine is going to have inspectors there, actually checking over the wreckage of the aircraft, and they are reconstructing it. In fact, there's already pictures online that you can find. How close to a conclusion will they be able to draw without that black box data?
Without the black box, with just off of the hard data alone, you could end up in a 50, 60, maybe close to 70% comfort on what happened by just the physical alone. It really is going to be determined on what they find during the physical analysis, during the reconstruction. If they find that there is there is physical damage to the fuselage that took place at the wing root just after the wing, and that's where the actual initial explosion took place, well, pretty obvious that it's not an engine failure at that point. However, that still goes towards other questions of, was it because of an external attack, or was it because of a more terrorist style attack that took place?
Mhm.
And then you get those other things. It may rule out one thing, but it may not necessarily point directly to one thing. It's a definite step in the process that it can tell you everything you need to know for a reasonable conclusion initially, or it can tell you so little that it's a good practice, but it might be effectively worthless, other than knowing, well, here's where the failure began. We still can't tell from physical analysis alone what else happened in the chain of events. And that's why that data collection of the data recorder systems is so crucial to any analysis of the crash of a civilian aircraft.
I have a couple more questions, hopefully really quick, and then I think we can start to wrap this up. But at a minimum, one other thing is, we've heard a lot of speculation on it, but obviously,
Gonna happen.
yeah. But I haven't heard anyone suggest that if this was anti-aircraft fire, that it was done intentionally. Can you think of a reason? I haven't heard of anyone. Is there a reason you think that they would have done this intentionally, or would you probably be on the assumption that it was an accident if it happened?
I would err towards accident if it was, um, if it was shown to be external, if it was not a mechanical failure as was reported so quickly after it initially being
Yeah.
taken down, which I'm willing to throw that out simply based off of trying to cover themselves initially from the outset.
Well, let's
However,
quickly. I failed to mention that earlier, and I think that's important. There was a report that it was a mechanical failure, and that was conclusive. Mechanical failure, we know, and that came out about 15 minutes after the crash. And
yeah,
nobody's going to do that. However, that came, as I understand it, from the Ukrainian agency that governs their airspace. And they, I don't think, would be interested in covering it up. So I'm more inclined to think that that was just somebody really doing something stupid. But
yeah,
um,
yeah, and so that it really is a tough thing because trying to determine any sort of intent of the event from the information that the and just the crash scene analysis is going to give is going to be speculation at best. It's not until a further investigation after the initial crash investigation takes place that we might have a chance at finding out at that point. But with how tight-lipped certain agencies in other countries are, I am not going to hold my breath on if it is shown to be even inconclusive. It ends up being one of those things that we may never know, or it may be 20, 30 years before we know for reasons of national security and international peace. Because
mm,
with the number of international victims of the event, and and it coinciding with the attacks that took place in Iraq from Iran, it is such a sensitive issue that really could spiral out of control quicker than people realize. You want to make sure that it is handled correctly, and that is an increasing problem with the way a lot of the countries at play have been historically working together, especially over the last decade. There's not a lot of reason for them to trust each other, which is, I think, playing into the reason why Iran has said we're not releasing the black box data, because of that systematic distrust between the other nations.
I do want to say, and just to clarify one thing, we asked you on because you are obviously an expert in this and really understand it very well, far better than us. We would appreciate if you could just give the facts. The wild speculation, that's our job. And
Yep.
Ansgar and I take wild, unsubstantiated speculation very seriously. We enjoy it, and we would really like to keep doing it. So please don't steal our thunder. You're here exclusively to talk about facts and to allow us to do that. And besides, you've got a reputation, so which may not have been helped by coming on this show. But if you could stick to the facts and just let us do the wild speculation, I would appreciate it. And don't worry, we'll cover you on it.
Well, no, and exactly it. That's where I came into this knowing that there are a lot of questions with very few answers with the situation. And I do not expect any sort of quick answers to this. And honestly, if there are answers that come out that give the sense of it being rushed or too quick of an answer, it gives reason to pause and really evaluate what else is going on. Is there something else at play that is pushing this beyond just wanting to figure out what it is? Because a lot of times people are going to want to know an answer. And I understand it. The families that have been directly affected by this, they want to know, and they want to know yesterday what happened. The unfortunate bit is the more rushed an analysis and investigation of this type is, the more prone to error it is. And that's where understandably having patience is going to be a virtue and a necessity with this sort of situation, even without the extra political BS that's connected to it.
All right. So basically, I think what we're hearing is that Jared, who has been great coming on such short notice, is saying that the investigation will probably be done tomorrow or the next day. He expects it will find that Iran intentionally and deliberately downed the, and this is, I'm just paraphrasing the last hour for those of you who've been watching, downed in one of the most aggressive acts of war he's ever heard of. And he expects a full retaliation. So thank you very much for that opinion. And I want to say that to someone who does have a good sense of humor about it. I'm going to be in real trouble.
Oh, no. I really find it funny because there was actually a conversation that took place last week on Planner Walk's channel where he specifically wanted hot takes. And so I decided to join in and give him a real juicy one because, of course, right now I'm kind of eating my words on it a little bit because I went in there with the thought of, with all the shenanigans that have been going on, why continue to give these power players in control and access to the military might of each nation? Why continue to give them a middle ground where they can tinker and toy and play with things with seemingly minimal risk? Why not up their risk and tell them, you know what, if you want to do something, you have two choices, not 50 choices. You have two: all out war or absolute nothing. Which are you going to pick? If we get rid of that middle option, we can start to cut through a lot of the muddling and a lot of the nonsense that ends up essentially being a really high stakes game of, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you.
I did. Oh my God. Yeah. That's like, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it was interesting because I went in there. I was like, why not just tell them, pardon my French, but shit or get off the pot. If you're going to fight, go all in. And it was, I went in there intending that shock value to get people to be like, wait a minute. Whoa, wait, why would we want to do that? It's like, okay, now we got you thinking. Think about it that way. Would you rather have them go all out or do nothing or allow the status quo to continue?
And you said you're eating your words on this one?
Because this was said, and then here we are less than a week later, Iran decides to make an attack, and it's like, oh,
Uh, all right. Well, and we
I
will have you
swear
back
I did
on.
not have anything to do with the attacks.
And so Jared is also advocating that all countries engage in full all-out war against all the others at all times. And I think that's a very controversial position, and we will have him back on to further explain that. Oh yeah, Jay Brown, your buddy there, sent us a DM and said, "Oh, this is the system he's talking about." So I that where you guys are calculating who can nuke who from where, and I click on the link and it says nuclearsecrets.com or something like that. I was like, I'm bailing on this one. I'm really glad I did that from Ansgar's account.
Nukemap and missilemap.com are fun sites.
Glad you think so. We'll see if the NSA tells
Unless you have
so
anxiety, and then never visit them ever.
Well, okay, let's remember, one of the easiest ways to deal with high stress, high risk situations such as military service, police service, firefighters, EMTs, ER, your high stress, quite literal life and death situations, you'll notice a common thread throughout the vast majority of people who actually survive and thrive in those situations. We have a very dark sense of humor, and it's by necessity. Because especially on the military side, you really do have to early on come to grips with the idea that you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, and some random attack could happen and I could be gone tomorrow. So in the meantime, let's enjoy life. Let's enjoy what I'm doing, enjoy what I have around me, enjoy the life that I have at this time. But at the same time, be prepared if that attack does happen and I am able to react.
All right. Well, I think that is a spectacular note to end on. Could you really quickly refresh everyone's memory who you are and where they can find you?
So I'm actually commenting in the live chat right now so people can actually see the channel name of AT2 Productions.
And we can maybe mod you real quick temporarily so you can drop links, or you can. Well, I think our mods have the links anyway. But let me.
Yeah, if one of our mods could post his links, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and as I said, for those who weren't here at the beginning, on that channel, I do host a few regular live streams, the predominant one being Veterans Talk Weekly, which takes place every Friday night, where it's a bunch of other people like me, the salty military veterans we do have a couple guys who are actually still active duty join us as well, where we'll talk about everything from these sorts of situations all the way down to really just something that we found funny and felt like seeing who else we could make laugh and kind of make their day in a way that some people might find offensive. Word of warning, I actually did that late last night, early this morning on my Discord server to pretty much everyone. And then again to the panel before the live stream that took place on Red's Rhetoric's channel about, what was that, 7 hours ago?
Yeah, it's been crazy. And the awards ceremony was today, and I was only able to catch part of it. I have no spoilers. I'm going to catch the rest. Mikey entered the live chat, said, "What did I miss? We talked missiles. We solved the whole problem. We know what's wrong with the Middle East." And I logged into a nuclear missile tracking website with Ansgar's account. The NSA is on their way, and it's perfectly fine because I hear with the new procedures, their full body cavity searches are simply divine. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. You are prepared. You're prepared, or you're looking forward to it. I'm just wondering.
Yes.
We'll leave that a mystery. Let's just say I'm not handing over the black box.
Well, we've got a Patreon hangout tomorrow. All our Patreons are invited. We will be dropping a link on the Patreon page. Any level Patreon. If you're a Patreon, you can come on in and join us. We hope you guys will consider, if you like this channel, supporting it and doing that. If you like watching Ansgar and I tortured and really, truly, just about at the end of human capacity, why don't you like and subscribe and hit the bell so that when there is another catastrophe in about 15 or 20 minutes, you can see us come on and start to hallucinate from sleep deprivation on live stream. But other than that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jared, once again. It was very short notice, but we really do appreciate it. And I think that's what we needed to know after yesterday. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
No
Good
problem.
night.
Pleasure.